What if the difference between life and death in a dogfight wasn't courage, or training, or even the gun in your hands? What if it came down to something far stranger, your ability to shoot at nothing at all? Imagine firing hundreds of bullets at fast-moving enemy planes and missing every single shot, because hitting your target meant aiming where it isn't yet, into empty sky. This is the paradox that defined aerial combat, where instinct and skill collided in the chaos of war. Today, we dive into the shocking truth behind how gunners learned to defy their instincts and aim not where the enemy was, but where it would be, changing the course of history forever. December 1942. High above the Solomon Islands, 9-year-old Eddie Kowalski peers into the blinding sun, his heart pounding. A Japanese Zero screams toward his B-17 bomber, slicing through the endless blue. Eddie's hands tighten around his Browning Mitzwy machine gun, every muscle ready. It's a moment suspended in time. The world narrows to that speeding enemy fighter, a threat hurtling with lethal intent, closing the distance in seconds. He tightens his grip on the Browning M2 machine gun, eyes locked on the looming shape of the enemy fighter slicing through the sunlit sky. Every muscle tenses as he tracks its deadly approach, weighing seconds that feel like an eternity. Then, in a snap decision, the trigger squeezes down and bullets roar into the air, an explosive burst fired with desperate hope. 100 rounds tear through the sky, but not a single bullet finds its mark. The Japanese Zero blazes by, untouched and lethal. In that instant, Eddie Kowalski learns the brutal truth. Bravery and firepower mean nothing if your aim is off, even by inches. The deadly dance of speed and distance is merciless, leaving gunners like him firing at ghosts, watching enemy fighters slip through the cracks of their gun sights. Eddie wasn't a bad shot or a coward. In fact, he was the very first face we see caught in a deadly paradox that was silently killing thousands of Allied airmen. Despite their courage and training, these gunners were fighting an invisible enemy, not their foes, but the unforgiving laws of physics. No matter how hard they aimed, their hits were few and far between. Eddie's story is just the beginning of a nightmare where skill alone wasn't enough to survive the skies. In 1943, a stark and terrifying truth came to light. Despite rigorous training and fierce determination, aerial gunners managed to hit their enemy less than 4% of the time. Imagine that out of every 100 bullets fired, fewer than 4 found their mark. This wasn't a failure of courage or skill, but a chilling revelation about the brutal reality of air combat. The skies were filled with deadly tension, but the guns aimed high, and yet the enemy planes escaped damage far too often. This study shook the very foundation of air warfare, exposing a problem far more complicated than anyone had imagined. 4%. That's a staggering figure. Imagine this: the Browning M2 machine gun, roaring at 13 rounds per second. In just 10 seconds, it sends 130 bullets blazing into the sky. But with only a 4% hit rate, only about 5 of those bullets actually connect with the enemy. 5 out of 130. That's barely enough to make a difference in the chaos of a dogfight. It's an impossible odds game, fought not just with courage, but with a frustrating mathematical truth: most shots miss, and lives hang in the balance. 5 out of every 130 bullets actually hit their target. That's a staggering statistic when you think about it. Despite unleashing a storm of lead, the odds were still massively stacked against gunners like Eddie Kowalski. Just 5 hits in a hail of 130 rounds isn't enough to bring down the lightning-fast enemy fighters. It's a sobering reminder that bravery and firepower alone don't guarantee survival when physics and timing are working against you. The sky wasn't just a battleground, It was a cruel game of chance, where even the most skilled could see their efforts fall short. The grim truth was clear. The air war was unraveling, slipping through the Allied grasp like sand. Despite unwavering bravery and countless sorties, the skies were becoming a relentless slaughterhouse. Planes fell by the dozen, crews torn apart, and hope was fading fast. This wasn't just about losing battles, it was about the terrifying reality that sheer ineffectiveness in gunnery was turning the tides against them. It was as if the very tools and training meant to protect had betrayed them, leaving men exposed to merciless enemy fighters. The war in the air was slipping out of control, and the cost in lives was staggering. By 1943, the situation was dire. The U.S. 8th Air Force was hemorrhaging planes and men. At an alarming rate, hundreds of bombers lost every month, thousands of brave souls sent to their deaths. The skies over Europe had transformed into a vast, deadly graveyard. But these weren't failures of courage or equipment. Something deeper was wrong, something that would force a brutal reckoning with the very nature of aerial combat. The question hung heavy in the air: how could such a mighty force be falling so swiftly when every gunner was fighting with everything they had? These gunners were brave, determined, and well-equipped. So why couldn't they hit anything? The answer wasn't a failure of men, but a failure of instinct. They faced an enemy they couldn't see or touch, a relentless force of physics that outpaced their natural reactions. Targets moved faster than they could track, and bullets took time to reach them. Their instincts screamed to aim directly at the threat, but to succeed, they had to do the opposite: aim ahead, into empty space where the enemy would be moments later. It was a paradox that cost lives, a brutal lesson in fighting not just the enemy, but the very way their minds worked. They were fighting an invisible enemy: physics. At speeds exceeding hundreds of miles per hour, an enemy fighter wasn't just a fast-moving target, it was a blur, a fleeting shadow crossing the sky. For a gunner, every fraction of a second mattered. Bullets didn't travel instantly. They took time to reach their mark. By the moment a round left the barrel, the enemy plane had already slipped away from where the gun was aimed. This meant gunners couldn't simply point and shoot at the plane's current position. Instead, they had to predict where it would be aiming far ahead of the target, into empty sky. It was a deadly game of anticipation, a battle not just against the enemy, but against time and movement itself. In the split second it takes for a bullet to reach its target, that target has already moved sometimes miles away from where you aimed. This means the gunner can't simply point and shoot. They have to predict where the enemy plane times will be, times and fire into nothing but empty sky. It's a deadly guessing game against physics itself, defying every instinct that tells you to lock directly onto the threat. This invisible dance of speed, distance, and timing turns shooting down an enemy into a puzzle where trailing the target is failure and leading it the only path to survival. This technique, called deflection shooting, means you don't aim directly at the enemy plane. Instead, you lead the target firing into the empty space where the plane times will times be by the time your bullets arrive. It sounds simple, but it's one of the most counterintuitive moves in all of combat. Your instincts scream to point straight at the threat, but success demands you do the exact opposite and trust your mind to predict movement faster than your eyes can track it. Every fiber of your being screams to point directly at the enemy, aim dead center at the threat barreling toward you. It feels natural, instinctive. But in the chaos of a dogfight, that instinct becomes your worst enemy. To survive, you must do something counterintuitive, ignore what your senses demand, and instead Fire where the enemy will be a moment from now in empty sky ahead of the target. It's a brutal betrayal of your instincts, but this act of defiance is the difference between life and death in the sky. Gunnery schools did their best, using simulators to train rookies, but nothing could capture the chaos and split-second demands of real combat. Worse yet, new gunners made a fatal mistake. Watching their tracer rounds fly harmlessly behind enemy planes, they assumed they were aiming too far ahead. So, they corrected by pulling their aim closer, right back toward the target. This misunderstanding was deadly. Instead of leading the enemy where it would be, they aimed where it was, sealing their fate before the first bullet even fired. The new gunners saw their tracer rounds slipping behind the enemy planes and panicked. Thinking they were overcompensating, they aimed closer to the target, believing this would correct their mistake. But in reality, this instinctive correction doomed them. By aiming too close, they failed to lead the target properly, firing directly at where the plane was, not where it would be. This fatal misunderstanding sealed their fate, leaving them just as ineffective as before, caught in a deadly trap of their own assumptions. October 1943, Schweinfurt. The raids were devastating. Bombers returned shattered, many limping home on fumes and luck alone. The crews were broken physically and mentally. Morale plummeted. Each mission felt more like a death sentence. The entire Allied bombing campaign was teetering on the edge of collapse. These losses weren't just numbers. They were lives, dreams, and the very hope of turning the tide of war. The airmen had courage, determination, and the best equipment, yet something was fatally wrong. This crisis forced a brutal question: how could such bravery meet such failure? The answer lay beyond bullets. It was a battle against unseen forces inside and out. In a frantic search for breakthroughs, Captain Robert Williams stumbled upon an old, overlooked technical paper from 1924, authored by a man named James Puckle. The paper wasn't new, but its insights were shockingly ahead of their time. Puckle, a World War I veteran, had already done the math showing that once airplanes reached speeds over 150 miles per hour, no pilot could instinctively calculate the lead angle necessary to hit a moving target. It was a revelation that had been gathering dust while hundreds of men paid with their lives. Now at last, someone had found the key to cracking the deadly puzzle that was plaguing Allied air gunners. James Puckle, a World War I veteran, wasn't just relying on gut feelings, he did the math. Back in 1924, he proved a brutal truth. Once aircraft speeds topped 150 miles per hour, the lead angles needed to hit a moving target became too complex for any human mind to calculate on the fly. In other words, aiming ahead of a fast-moving plane wasn't a simple skill. It was a puzzle too difficult to solve instinctively. Hundreds of men would later pay with their lives because this warning went unheeded. The problem was understood, but how on earth do you teach a frantic gunner to do complex trigonometry in the middle of a dogfight? James Puckle had seen it coming 2 decades before the skies flooded with tragedy. His warnings, buried and ignored, cost hundreds of lives. The problem was clear now. Pilots had to master not just shooting, but the complex math of anticipating a target's flight. But how do you teach trigonometry in the chaos of a dogfight when split-second decisions leave no room for calculations? This challenge would demand a new way of thinking, pushing beyond instinct into something far more precise. At the same time, across the Atlantic, the British were grappling with the same daunting challenge during the Battle of Britain. Their pilots fought relentlessly, but even the legendary Spitfires couldn't hit their nimble foes with any great accuracy. The problem wasn't lack of bravery or skill, It was the cruel physics of aerial combat itself, demanding a whole new way of thinking. The desperate struggle in the skies was pushing them to break every rule they thought they knew about aiming and shooting. This wasn't just a fight against enemy planes, it was a battle against the limits of human instinct. Despite being piloted by some of the finest aces, RAF Squadron 609 was battling a harsh reality. Their hit rate was a dismal 6%. Flying the legendary Spitfire, they faced enemy fighters that seemed almost untouchable. It wasn't lack of skill or courage that held them back. It was the invisible, unforgiving challenge of deflection shooting. The faster the planes, the harder it became to hit a moving target. Even the best pilots struggled to aim where the enemy times would be times instead of where at times was asterisk, and that tiny gap made all the difference between victory and defeat. Horace Darley wasn't just any leader, he was a competitive clay pigeon shooter, someone who knew that the best shotgun artists don't rely on calculations or formulas. Instead, they times feel, times the angles, trusting their instincts and muscle memory to guide the shot. This was a radical insight for a squadron facing a 6% hit rate. If they could learn to shoot by feel, not by numbers, they might just transform their fate in the skies. But could instinct really outsmart the brutal physics of aerial combat? In a move that seemed utterly reckless, squadron leader Horace Darley grounded his entire unit right in the middle of the fiercest battle. No sorties, no dogfights, just 3 full days on the ground. Instead of weapons and combat, he made his pilots focus on one bizarre task: shooting at banners towed behind aircraft. It was a radical break from everything they'd been taught: no aiming at planes, no quick reflexes, just pure, repeated practice on moving targets that forced them to get the feel of shooting ahead of something, to times lead times instead of follow. At a moment when every minute counted, Darley wagered that rewiring their instincts was the only way to survive. Horace Darley threw out the rulebook. His command? Forget aiming or crunching numbers mid-fight. Instead, pilots were told to times feel times the shot, trust that instinct buried deep in their subconscious. It was a rebellious idea, a complete break from everything traditional training preached. But could this raw, gut-level feeling really outmatch the unforgiving laws of physics? Could a pilot's intuition defy speed, distance, and time to hit a target that was, quite literally, moving through empty space before their eyes? At first, it sounded like madness, but desperation breeds innovation, and the skies demanded an answer. The first attempts were brutal. Pilots trained for precision and direct shooting now had to unlearn everything. Years of instincts yelled at them to aim straight at the enemy plane, but they had to resist fight against that deeply wired survival reaction. Frustration grew thick in the air. Bullets missed, morale slipped, and doubt crept in. It was like retraining the mind to see the invisible to fire where nothing yet existed. The struggle was real. It felt almost like madness. But every miss drove home a harsh truth. To win, they had to embrace the chaos, surrender control, and trust a feeling they barely understood. After 3 days, packed with relentless drills and constant practice, a transformation occurred. The pilots began to internalize the complex dance of leading a target, moving beyond textbook theory to an almost instinctive grasp of the physics involved. Their minds shifted. What once felt like an impossible calculation started to feel natural, like catching a ball or hitting a moving target on the range. This breakthrough wasn't just technical, it was a new kind of intuition, forged through repetition and focus. Suddenly, the invisible rules of deflection shooting started to make sense, and the pilots gained a newfound confidence that they could control the chaos of the dogfight. The change was striking. After days of relentless practice with towed banners and intense repetition, the pilots returned to combat with a new kind of confidence, and their hit rates doubled. Suddenly, the impossible felt within reach. What had started as fumbling attempts to feel the shots evolved into an almost instinctual skill. This breakthrough wasn't just luck, it was proof that training the subconscious mind could rewrite years of instinctual failure. For these pilots, a terrifying and deadly dance in the skies was starting to turn in their favor. But the war wasn't over, and bigger challenges still loomed ahead. Captain Horace Darley didn't just share a training tip, he ignited a quiet revolution. He argued that deflection shooting wasn't something you could think through in the moment. It had to be drilled into your subconscious until it became automatic. No more guessing, no more hesitation, just a deeply ingrained reflex to aim where the enemy times will times be, not where at times is asterisk. This shift changed everything, quietly rewriting the rules of aerial combat. The battlefield wasn't just a test of skill anymore. It became a test of training the mind to operate beyond instinct. And with that, a new era of gunnery began to take shape. American observers took note of the British breakthrough, witnessing hit rates soar despite the chaos of battle. But their own challenge was uniquely brutal. Unlike fighter pilots who could maneuver their entire aircraft to line up a shot, bomber gunners were trapped in fixed turrets, locked into cramped compartments that limited their angles and agility. They couldn't simply feel the lead like the Spitfire pilots. Instead, these gunners had to wrestle with impossible calculations while under fire, relying solely on their training and instincts to aim ahead of a target moving at hundreds of miles per hour. It was a glaring problem that demanded a solution beyond human reflexes. Unlike fighter pilots who could move their entire aircraft instinctively to line up a shot, bomber gunners found themselves confined inside turrets, limited in movement, and locked in place. They couldn't simply feel the lead like clay pigeon shooters or aces flying agile planes. Instead, they faced a brutal challenge: to hit an enemy streaking across the sky at impossible speeds from a fixed position. The solution was clear but daunting. They needed a machine to do the thinking for them, to calculate the exact moment and place to shoot, because human reflexes and instincts alone weren't enough in the chaos of aerial combat. Behind closed doors at MIT, a secret group known as Division 7 tackled a problem that had confounded gunners for years. Led by the brilliant Dr. Charles Stark Draper, this elite team set out not just to understand the challenge, but to engineer a solution that would surpass human limitations. Their mission was clear: build a device that could think through the impossible math of deflection shooting, calculating lead angles faster and more precisely than any mind could during the chaos of combat. It was here, in this hush of innovation, that technology would begin to rewrite the rules of aerial warfare forever. As the focus sharpens, the mission changes. No longer just spotting the problem, the race is on to engineer a fix one that sidesteps human limits entirely. It's a bold leap from understanding to invention, a push to build something that can think faster, calculate sharper, and compensate for what the human mind cannot. The clock is ticking, and the stakes couldn't be higher. This shift isn't just about tools, it's about creating a machine that outperforms instinct, that turns impossible odds into something achievable. It's the crucial turning point where raw bravery meets breakthrough technology, aiming to rewrite the rules of aerial combat forever. At MIT, a team led by the brilliant Dr. Charles Stark Draper was racing against time. Their mission? To build a machine that could think faster and more precisely than any human gunner. They labored tirelessly, crafting what would become the Mark 14 computing gun sight, a mechanical marvel that could calculate lead angles in real time amid the chaos of combat. This wasn't just any ordinary gun sight. By framing the enemy plane within its view, the sight's intricate system of gyroscopes, cams, and gears measured speed and distance, then displayed the perfect aiming point as a glowing reticle. Suddenly, the impossible math of deflection shooting was done for the gunner, turning instinct into instantaneous accuracy. The gun sight was more than just a piece of equipment. It was a mechanical brain designed to do what no human mind could in the heat of battle. To use it, the gunner would first frame the enemy plane within the sight, setting its range precisely. This simple act was the key to unlocking a complex series of calculations happening behind the scenes. As the gunner tracked the target for just a couple of seconds, the sight's internal system of gyroscopes, cams, and gears would measure the plane's speed and trajectory, calculating the exact lead angle needed. It was a marriage of human focus and intricate machinery, combining to overcome the insurmountable challenge of hitting a moving target by aiming where it would be, not where it was. As the gunner kept his steady gaze locked on the enemy aircraft, the Mark 14's intricate mechanical brain sprang to life. Inside the sight, a complex dance of gyroscopes spun. Cams rotated and gears meshed, all working together in perfect harmony. Over the course of 2 intense seconds, this analog marvel measured the speed and trajectory of the target, performing lightning-fast calculations that no human could do under fire. The machine would then translate this data into an illuminated aiming reticle called the pipper, which hovered right over the exact spot in the sky where the gunner had to lead his shots. All that was left was for him to trust the device, place the pipper on the enemy, and pull the trigger, letting the mechanical mind solve the impossible puzzle of deflection shooting. In the gunner's sight, a simple yet revolutionary tool came to life. The illuminated reticle, known as the pipper. Floating steadily in his view, it was more than just a dot or crosshair. It was the key to cracking a deadly problem. No longer did he have to calculate the impossible lead angles in the heat of battle. The machines did the math for him. All he needed to do was line up the pipper on the enemy plane and pull the trigger. This glowing guide transformed a frantic guessing game into a calculated strike, turning the chaos of aerial combat just a little bit more in his favor. All the gunner had to do was place the pipper, the glowing reticle, right on the enemy plane and pull the trigger. In that moment, the impossible math vanished. No more guessing lead angles or firing blindly into the sky. The Mark 14 computing gun sight did the thinking, tracking the target's speed and distance, then calculating exactly where the bullets needed to fly. It was like having a mechanical brain on board, solving problems too complex for a human in the chaos of battle. Suddenly, hitting a fast-moving fighter wasn't a miracle, it was a precise science. The impact was immediate and undeniable. Suddenly, what once felt impossible, transforming a mere 5% success rate into over 25%, became reality. This wasn't just a minor tweak, it was a 5-fold leap forward. Every gunner equipped with the Mark 14 gun sight found new confidence. No longer were they blindly firing into chaos, they now had precision and prediction working for them. The mechanical brain had cracked the code, turning desperation into hope and redefining what was possible in aerial combat. This breakthrough didn't just save lives, it rewrote the rules of air warfare forever. This was the technological silver bullet they had prayed for. The Mark 14 sight promised to transform those dismal hit rates overnight. Yet, reality struck a harsh blow. Production was agonizingly slow. The newer bombers snagged the first deliveries, leaving so many crews waiting in grim anticipation. Despite the breakthrough, many gunners still faced the brutal skies, armed only with outdated tools. The promise was there, but the war wouldn't pause for manufacturing. Every delay meant more lives lost, until this mechanical brain could finally tip the scales. While MIT's geniuses raced to craft their mechanical brain, the Mark 14 computing gun sight far across the Pacific, a very different solution was quietly taking shape. It wasn't born in labs or filled with complex formulas. Instead, it grew from real-world experience, sketches in notebooks, and the hard lessons of combat. This wasn't about engineering miracles, but about raw ingenuity. A simple system crafted by a gunner who had no formal education, but a keen eye and meticulous notes. It was a grassroots revolution in aerial gunnery, proving sometimes the best answers come from those who live the fight, not just theorize it. Staff Sergeant Bill Fleming wasn't a genius engineer or a top-tier tactician. He had no fancy degree, just sheer determination and a keen eye honed from countless hours in the cockpit of his dive bomber. Every dogfight, every burst of gunfire, he scribbled notes, sketches, details about where he aimed and how the enemy moved. His notebook became his secret weapon, simple, practical, and brutally effective. In a world chasing complex machines and heavy calculations, Fleming's method cut through the chaos with straightforward clarity. It was raw experience distilled into rules anyone could follow. And this humble notebook would soon challenge the smartest minds at MIT. Every time Bill Fleming shot down an enemy fighter, he didn't just move on, he grabbed a pencil and a notebook. He sketched the intense dogfight, capturing the exact moment of each shot. Where had he aimed? How far ahead of the target? His observations became more than just notes. They were clues to a profound truth. Without fancy instruments or complex math, Fleming was piecing together a simple, visual system from pure experience, measuring lead not in degrees or seconds, but in plane lengths. This grassroots method held the promise of turning guesswork into a reliable art. Staff Sergeant Bill Fleming wasn't your typical gunner, no formal education, just a keen eye and relentless determination. He began jotting down every detail after each victory, sketching dogfights and noting exactly where he aimed in relation to his target. Then he hit on a simple yet brilliant idea, measuring the lead needed in plane lengths. Imagine this: if a Japanese Zero zoomed by at a right angle, you'd aim 2 zeros ahead in empty air. It was straightforward, visual, and easy to remember, even amid the chaos. Mini hook. Could a high school dropout's humble notebook really rival the complex calculations of MIT's finest minds? Staff Sergeant Bill Fleming's simple rule of thumb cut through the chaos like a beacon. If a Japanese Zero is flying at a 90-degree angle, aim not at the plane itself, but 2 zeros worth of empty sky ahead. It sounds almost too straightforward, yet in the heat of battle, this little mental measure gave gunners a lifeline, a visual shortcut to master deflection shooting without frantic calculation. This method transformed guessing into knowing, turning instinct from a deadly flaw into a powerful ally. Would this high school dropout's notebook rival the brilliant minds at MIT? As Fleming's technique spread, it reshaped air combat training across the Pacific, proving that sometimes the simplest ideas hold the deepest truths. He showed his notebook to his commander, the legendary ace Butch O'Hare. O'Hare immediately recognized the brilliance hidden in its simplicity. It was a crystal-clear, practical guide amid the chaos of war. No complex calculations, no fancy machines, just straightforward rules anyone could grasp, even under pressure. This was the kind of tool that could save lives and turn hesitant gunners into confident sharpshooters. O'Hare saw not just a method, but a lifeline, something that could rewrite the story of the battle in the skies. Bill Fleming's spot shooting method was a game changer. It wasn't complicated math or fancy technology, it was simple, visual, and easy to remember under the chaos of battle. He taught gunners to think in plane lengths. If a Japanese Zero was flying at a right angle, just aim 2 zero lengths ahead in empty air. This straightforward rule cut through the confusion and fear, giving crews a reliable way to lead their targets. It turned the impossible instinct of aiming where the enemy will be into something anyone could grasp, even under fire. This method didn't just improve accuracy, it restored hope and confidence on the battlefield. Within just 6 weeks of rolling out Fleming's unorthodox training on the USS Lexington, something remarkable happened. Hit rates more than doubled. Suddenly, gunners weren't just firing wildly, they were hitting their targets with new precision. This simple visual method gave them confidence and clarity in the chaos of battle. It was proof that sometimes the best solutions don't come from complex machines or advanced math, but from the sharp observations and resourcefulness of the everyday soldier. The fleet took notice, and soon Fleming's system was spreading, reshaping aerial combat training across the Navy and Army alike. By mid-1944, Bill Fleming's simple yet brilliant system wasn't just a local success, it had swept across the entire fleet. His method of measuring lead in plane lengths made deflection shooting accessible and intuitive for countless gunners. So powerful was its impact that the Army Air Forces took notice and rewrote their training manuals to include variations of Fleming's approach. What had started as the notes of a high school dropout evolved into a foundational change in aerial combat tactics. Suddenly, gunners weren't just guessing at where to aim, they had a straightforward, proven technique guiding their fire. This was a turning point, but the battle to master deflection shooting was far from over. They thought the puzzle was solved, science, tech, and techniques all in place. But once the fight erupted, something crucial was still missing. No amount of knowledge or gadgets could fully prepare the gunners for the brutal reality of combat. The battlefield demanded more than just skill. It demanded an unbreakable mental edge. Army psychologists uncovered a hidden and terrifying foe lurking within the minds of gunners. Threat fixation, collapse. In the split second of terror during an attack, the primitive brain hijacks control, overriding all conscious training. Despite knowing the aim-ahead rule, gunners would instinctively lock their sights directly on the enemy plane, exactly the opposite of what was needed. It was a devastating psychological trap. Years of science, technology, and tactics suddenly felt powerless against this primal reflex. This unseen enemy turned the mind's own survival instincts into a deadly weakness, threatening to undo every hard-fought gain in the skies. Under extreme stress, the primal brain takes over completely. All the careful training, the conscious effort to aim ahead, it vanishes in an instant. The gunner's mind goes dark, and the hard-earned knowledge of deflection shooting slips away. Instead, instinct takes control, screaming to point the gun directly at the threat, the enemy fighter screaming towards you. It's a cruel betrayal. Exactly when precision is needed most, the body reverts to its most basic survival reflex. The very skill needed to survive melts away, leaving the gunner helpless against the overwhelming rush of fear. But no matter how much they tried, the gunner's aim betrayed them. In moments of terror, their bodies took over, overriding years of training and every clever technique drilled into their minds. Instead of leading the target, they instinctively fixed their sights right on the threat, the enemy plane itself. It was a heartbreaking collapse, where fear hijacked skill, turning trained marksmen into helpless victims. The very survival instinct meant to protect them became their undoing, pulling their sight away from victory and toward inevitable danger. All the training, all the technology. It was all being undone by the most basic survival instinct ingrained deep in the human brain. No matter how much knowledge gunners had, when terror hit, their primal minds took over. The conscious grasp of deflection shooting slipped away like smoke. Their aim would snap back, almost automatically, to pointing directly at the enemy, the very instinct that doomed thousands. It felt like the problem had no solution, like the war was being lost not just on the battlefield, but inside the minds of those fighting it. The only cure was discovered to be repetition. Brutal, mind-numbing repetition. Gunners had to endure endless hours of firing at moving targets, over and over, until their bodies learned what their minds struggled to grasp. It wasn't just practice, it was rewiring the brain, forging automatic reflexes that could override terror in the heat of battle. With thousands of rounds fired and countless target passes, the impossible math of leading a target became instinctual, ingrained deep within muscle and memory. Only through this relentless cycle of repetition could a gunner's aim hold steady when the world was exploding around them. By late 1944, gunnery training had transformed into a relentless 10-week ordeal. Gunners fired up to 5,000 rounds at moving targets over and over again, grinding down the basic survival instincts that once betrayed them. This wasn't just practice, it was brain rewiring. Muscle memory was hammered so deep that fear itself couldn't break the reflex. Every round pushed them closer to automatic perfection, turning terror into deadly precision. The long hours, the sweat, the noise, all forged warriors who could aim ahead without a second thought, even when the world was falling apart around them. This was the final key to conquering what seemed impossible. Training grew relentless. Gunners fired from motorized turrets, tracking elusive targets darting across the sky. They practiced on banners towed behind boats, simulating the unpredictable, fast-moving enemy jets. Every round, every attempt, built muscle memory so deeply ingrained it could cut through the fog of terror. This wasn't just about aiming, it was about rewiring the subconscious to override panic and reflex. Because in those critical moments, when fear threatened to hijack their instincts, only that ingrained automatic response could save their lives and the lives of their crewmates. The goal was clear: to train gunners until deflection shooting became second nature, an automatic reflex that could cut through the chaos and terror of combat. This wasn't just about aiming, it was about rewiring the mind itself, forging a skill so deeply ingrained that even fear and adrenaline couldn't break it. Every round fired at those moving targets, every grueling hour spent tracking and predicting, hammered the lesson home. The gunner's hands had to move on instinct alone, trusting muscle memory to find the empty space where the enemy times would times be, not where it was now. Only then could they turn the nightmare of combat into a moment of deadly precision. The subconscious mind was a powerhouse for learning far quicker than the conscious mind ever imagined. Instead of trying to puzzle out complex calculations in the heat of battle, gunners would absorb countless shots and misses, slowly shaping reflexes through raw experience. Each round fired, each swinging turret, every split-second adjustment built feedback loops deep within their muscles and nerves. Over time, the act of leading a target turned from a deliberate calculation into an automatic instinct. It was a hidden shortcut where brains didn't think, they just reacted. This unseen process transformed fear into fluid motion, teaching gun crews to dance with physics itself. Elite veterans achieved a remarkable mental state known in Japanese as times mushin asterisk, or no mind. In this state, they operated flawlessly and instinctively, their actions flowing without conscious thought, even as fear and chaos raged around them. Their trained reflexes took over, allowing them to execute perfect deflection shooting while their conscious minds struggled to process the terror of battle. It was as if their bodies and subconscious minds had rewired themselves to perform with deadly precision, untouched by doubt or hesitation. This rare mastery separated the survivors from the fallen, turning gunners into lethal, almost superhuman defenders in the skies. But this level of skill was rare. The urgent demand for gunners meant many were rushed straight into combat before mastering the crucial reflexes. Without reaching what trainers called unconscious competence, these men fought on instinct alone, vulnerable to that same primal fear, pulling their aim back to the enemy's silhouette. It was a bitter truth. Training and technology meant nothing if terror could still hijack the mind in the blink of an attack. The war wasn't just against enemy planes, it was a battle within every gunner's own head. German fighter pilots were ruthless in exploiting this weakness. They meticulously scanned bomber formations, searching for hesitation, the slightest flicker of doubt in a gunner's eyes. In those moments of uncertainty, they struck with deadly precision, shattering the fragile defense of the once formidable bomber box. It was a brutal game of psychological warfare, where the enemy's fear became a weapon turned against them. German fighters were ruthless. They prowled the skies, meticulously scanning for weakness. A single wavering gunner meant disaster. With precision and speed, they targeted that vulnerability, tearing through the bomber's defenses. What once was an impenetrable fortress turned into exposed prey in moments. In a deadly game of cat and mouse, the difference between survival and destruction hinged on the crew's skill and nerve, turning that flying fortress into little more than a flying coffin. In the brutal dance of war, experience was everything. A veteran crew, honed by countless battles and relentless training, operated like a well-oiled machine, a flying fortress. Every move was precise, every shot calculated with deadly confidence. But for a green crew, fresh and untested, it was a different story. Their nerves betrayed them, their instincts fooled them, turning a potentially mighty bomber into little more than a flying coffin. This was more than just skill. It was the razor-thin edge between life and death, soaring through a storm of bullets. The principle uncovered amidst the fierce skies of World War II, aiming not where the target is, but where at times will be, times transformed the art of combat forever. This revelation laid the groundwork for every modern weapon system we rely on today. From the analog mechanical sights crafted in desperate battles to the digital fire control systems guiding today's jet fighters and missiles, this simple yet profound concept remains the heart of precision targeting. Even cutting-edge defense tools like the Phalanx CIWS are here because those World War II gunners learned to master not just their weapons, but their minds, training themselves to anticipate what's coming rather than reacting to what's in front of them. The mechanical Mark 14 gun sight, once a marvel of analog computing, didn't just solve a wartime problem, it set the stage for the future. As aviation evolved, this device transformed into the digital fire control systems that dominate today's jet fighters, guiding precision strikes with lightning speed. Modern missiles, from heat seekers to radar-guided projectiles, rely on the same predictive principle, anticipating where the target will be, not where it is. It's a legacy of innovation born from the desperate skies of World War II, proving how a single breakthrough can echo through time and reshape the art of aerial combat forever. Even modern anti-aircraft systems, like the Phalanx CIWS, are just doing what those World War II gunners did, only with radar tracking and lightning-fast reflexes no human could match. These machines calculate exactly where a target will be and fire with deadly precision, turning what was once a matter of gut instinct and nerve into a science of prediction and speed. It's a powerful reminder. The battle to hit a moving target didn't end in the skies of the past. Instead, it evolved, blending human insight with cutting-edge technology to create a whole new level of combat effectiveness. In the end, it wasn't some miraculous weapon that turned the tide. No, the true victory was a triumph of the human mind over its own limits. These men, faced with terror and chaos, learned to fight against their deepest, most primal instincts and found a way to win a brutal war. They rewired how they perceived danger, aiming not where the enemy was, but where at times would times be. This wasn't just technology or training. It was a profound transformation of instinct itself. It's a powerful reminder. Sometimes, to solve the impossible, we must first unlearn what feels natural and instead aim for the future, not the present. This lesson, born in blood and terror, reveals something profound. We are not prisoners of our instincts, far from it. We have the power to rewire our very perceptions, to reshape how we face a hostile reality. In the crucible of war, men learned this hard truth. They had to unlearn everything. Their survival instincts screamed at them, and instead, times aim where the enemy will be asterisk, not where they were. It was a victory of the human mind over fear itself. So ask yourself, what seemingly impossible problem could times solve if you dared to unlearn your instincts and aim for where the solution truly lies?